Control structures, otherwise known as control flow statements, allow us to alter the flow of execution of programs. Basically, we have two types. We have the conditionals and we have the loops. Typically, programs execute from top to bottom in a linear manner. But with control structures, we can make our programs to be dynamic. The conditionals allows our programs to make decisions. And with the loops, we can be able to repeat the execution of programs or code as many times as we want. Now let's start with the conditionals. Here we have conditionals. And under the conditionals, we have the if statement, we'll have the else statement, and finally, we have the elif statement. Now let's start with the if statement. Here we have if statements. With the if statement, we can be able to execute statements or code when certain conditions are met. So this is how we use the if statement. First, you provide the if keyword followed by a condition. So we can have something like a condition, then a colon. Inside the if statement, we're going to provide the code or the statement that we want to execute if the condition is true. Now let me provide a more realistic example. Here I'm going to have num is equal to 5. I'm going to have if followed by a condition. Condition here refers to an expression that evaluates to a Boolean value or just a Boolean value. So we can have something like if num is greater than 1, then a colon. After the colon, we'll provide the statements or the code that we want to execute if the condition is true. Here I'm going to have print, I'm going to have number greater than 1. Now let me run this program. If I run this program, we're going to get number greater than 1. So look at what happens. This statement can only execute if this condition is true. If this condition is not true, this statement will not execute. So we have our if statement which contains a condition. This condition has to be true before the statement under it can execute. So these lines of code under the if statement or under control structures are called the code block. I can as well decide to have something like print done. Then run the program. You can see number greater than 1 and done. These two print statements are called code block. If you look very closely, you can see that there's an indentation after the colon, and the both statements have the same indentation level. If I increase the indentation of any of the statements, I'm going to run into a syntax error. So this is how it should be. Now, let me change this value to 0 and run the program. And as you can see, nothing happens. And the reason why it seems like nothing happened is because this condition evaluated to false. Number here is 0, which makes this expression to evaluate to false. And because this is false, these statements will not execute. And this brings us to the else statement. Here I'm going to have else, then a colon. After the colon, I'm going to provide the statement. So here I can have print number less than 1. Now let me run the program, and as you can see, we have number less than 1. So look at what happens. When we run this program, it is going to evaluate if this condition is true. If this condition is true, these statements are going to execute. But if the condition is false or not true, then The statements under the else clause are going to execute. The only way this statement can execute is if the condition here is not true. Now let's take a look at this example. Here I'm going to have age is equal to 12. And here I'm going to have if age is greater than or equal to 18, print adult. Now I'm going to have an else clause. For this else clause, I'm going to have print not adult. Now let me run the program. And as you can see, we have not adult. And the reason for this is because this expression evaluated to false because we have age as 12, which is not greater than or equal to 18. And as such, the statement under the else clause get to be executed, which is print not adult. Now I can change this to 20. And this time around, if I run the program, it is going to display adult. Now, another thing you have to pay attention to is the indentation level of the if statement and the else statement. If you look closely, you can see that they are the same level. So be sure to use a matching else clause with the same indentation level for the if statement. So this is how it works. Now let's look at another example. In this example, we're going to be using the if and the else statements to determine whether a number is an even number or an odd number. So here I'm going to have even or odd number. I'm going to start by having a number is equal to 4. Here I'm going to have if num, then I'll use a modulo operator, and 2 is equal to 0. We have print even. Then for the else, we're going to have print odd. Now let's run the program, and as you can see, we have even. If I change this to 5, we're going to get odd. Now, if you look at this expression, we have num modulo 2, which is equal to 0. In other words, we're trying to establish that number divided by 2, that is the remainder, if number is divided by 2, the remainder should be 0 for the number to be an even number. Of course, even numbers are numbers divisible by 2 without remainder. So if the remainder, if number is divided by 2 is equal to 0, it makes that number an even number. And as such, we have print even. But if the number is not perfectly divisible by 2, it means the number is an odd number. And as such, we're going to have print odd. Now, finally, let's take one more example. In this example, we're going to be using the if and the else statements to determine whether a number or whether a score is up to the pass mark. So we can have something like a pass mark. Here I'm going to have 50. Now I'm going to be using the input statement to fetch data from the terminal. So I'm going to have score is equal to input. Here I'm going to have please enter a score. And because I'm expecting a score, I'm expecting a numeric value, I'm going to be wrapping this input function inside of a float or an int. So let's wrap it inside a bracket or a parenthesis. Then here I'm going to have float. Next, I'm going to be providing the if statement. So I'm going to have if score is greater than or equal to pass mark. colon. Here I'm going to have print past. Then else I'm going to have print failed. Now let's run this program, and I'm going to be running it from the terminal. So first I'm going to navigate to the folder containing the script. So we're going to have cd documents, cd Python classes. Then I'm going to have Python control structures.py. Then hit enter. Please enter a score. If I enter 49, I'm going to get failed. Now let me run it again. Enter a score. I enter 51. Passed. So let's try it one more time. And here I'm going to run the program. Enter a score. I'll enter 77 and hit enter. It is going to give me passed. Now we're going to be learning about the Elif statement. Elif is the same thing as else-if statements in some other programming languages, but in Python we call it the Elif statement. With the Elif, we can be able to introduce multiple conditions. Now let's take a look at this example. In this example, we're going to be categorizing age into something like child, adult, and elderly. So we're going to have something like child. And for this age brackets, we should be having something like 0 to 17. Now we're going to have adult. Adult is 18 and above. And finally, we can have elderly. Then elderly should be 65 and above. In our usual if and else statement, we can either have this or that. But with the Elif, we can have as many conditions as possible. So we can start by declaring the variable age. We can have age is equal to, I can just provide 12. Now I'm going to have if age is less than 18. Here I'm going to have print child. Now to introduce more conditions, I'm going to be using the Elif statement. So here I'm going to have Elif. After the Elif keyword, I'll provide a condition. So here I can have age greater than or equal to 18. And for this, I'm going to have print adult. Now I'm going to have another Elif statement. And like I said before, Elif statements allow us to introduce many conditions. So here I'm going to have Elif age is greater than or equal to 65. Here I'm going to have print elderly. Instead of writing greater than or equal to 18, I can have less than or equal to 64. So what this means is that any age from 18 to 64 is considered an adult. Then from 65 upwards, elderly. Now let's run the program. And as you can see, we have child. Now if I change this to 18, we're going to be getting adult. If I change this to 64, we're going to get adult. But if I change this to 65, we're going to get elderly. So if you want to introduce multiple conditions, you use the Elif statement. Now finally, we're going to do one more example. And in this example, we're going to be building a mini grading system. So first, we're going to establish the grade. And for this example, we're going to have A. And for this grade, we'll have 70 to 100. We'll have B. For the B, we'll have 60 to 69. We'll have C. For the C, we have 50 to 59. Then finally, we have F. And F should be below 50. That is below 50. Now we're going to have score is equal to, I'm going to be getting the input from the terminal. So I'm going to have input. Here I'm going to have, please enter a score. Now I'm going to have an if statement. Here I can have if score is greater than or equal to 70, then print A. Now to accommodate other grades, we're going to be using the Elif. So here we're going to have Elif score is greater than or equal to 60. So this should give us a B. So we can have print B. Now we're going to have another Elif statement. Here we have Elif score is greater than or equal to 50. For this, we're going to print C. Now we can decide to end this program with the else clause. So we can have something like else print F. So what this means is that if this condition here, if the score is 70 and above, this statement is going to be executed. If the score is 60 to 69, it is going to execute this. If the score is 50 to 59, it is going to print out C. Then, for any other score below 50, it is going to print F. So let's run this program in the terminal. Here we have Python control structures.py. Please enter a score. I'm going to enter 70. And as you can see, we have a traceback. And the reason for this is because we did not convert this input into a number. So I'm going to be wrapping it inside a float function. So we have parentheses, then we'll have floats. Now let's run the program again. So I'm going to start by clearing the terminal, then run the program. Please enter a score. I'm going to enter 70. And as you can see, we have A. Now let's run again. Please enter a score. I'll enter 66. And we have a B. Let's run again. Enter a score. We'll enter 55. And we'll have a C. Enter a score. I'll enter 44. And this will give me an F. Now one more time, let me run the program. Now I'm going to enter 101 and run the program. It still displays an A, which is a problem because scores are supposed to be from 0 to 100. Now let me enter a more outrageous value. So this time around, I'm going to enter 1000 and we'll still have A. So we're going to fix this shortly. Now let me run the program again. This time around, I'm going to enter a negative score. So I can have -10 and we'll still end up getting an F, which is not what we expected. Now first, we're going to handle the issue of negative scores. To handle this, I'm going to have another Elif clause. So here I'm going to have Elif score. And this time around, I'm going to have greater than or equal to 0. For this, we're going to have print f. Then for the else clause, this should be for negative scores. So any other score that is less than 0 should fall under the else clause. Here we're going to have negative score not allowed, something like this. Now let's run the program one more time. So this time we're going to have enter a score. I will enter 10. We'll get F. Enter a score. I'll enter -5 and hit enter. You can see negative score not allowed. And this is because we've handled it in the else clause. Now let's handle the issue of outrageous scores or scores that are above 100. And to handle this, we're going to be using a concept known as nested if statements. Now let me quickly introduce the nested if statement. So I'm going to comment out these codes. So first, I'm going to have score is equal to, let's say, 40. Here I'm going to have an if statement. So I can have if score is greater than 10. Now, inside of this if statement, I'm going to have another if statement. So here I can have if score is greater than 25. And here I'm going to have print score is greater than 10 and greater than 25. So this is what we call nested if statements. So first we have the outer if statement and we have the inner if statement. Before this statement will get to execute, this particular condition has to be true and this particular condition has to be true. If I run this program, you can see we have score is greater than 10 and greater than 25. Now let me change this to 25 and change this to less than 10. So let's run the program again. So we have score is greater than 25 and less than 10. So can have less than 10. Now, if I run this program, you can see nothing happened. Though this condition is met, but in the inner if statement, the condition is not met. And as such, this statement is not executed. So, but if I have something like score is greater than or equal to 50. For the print statement, we're going to have score is greater than 25 and greater or equal to, we can have 50. If we run this program, nothing happens. Though this condition is met, because the inner if statement evaluated to false, this statement is not going to execute. Now, if I change this one to 51 and run the program, you can see score is greater than 25 and greater or equal to 50. So this is what we call nesting. So this is nested if statement. The only way this particular statement is going to execute is if this condition and this condition are true. If not, the statement is not going to execute. If this particular statement is true and this one is false, it means that this particular if statement will never even get to execute in the first place. So this is how we nest if statements. Now let's go back to our program, and I'm going to be removing the comment. To handle the outrageous scores, that is scores above 100, I'm going to nest an if statement inside of this if statement. So here I'm going to have if score is less than or equal to 100. In this case, we're going to print A. Now I'm going to provide an else clause. So here we have else. Then after the else, I'm going to have print invalid score. I can have above 100. So when you are using nested ifs, you have to be mindful of the indentation level. So this particular nested if and this else are on the same level. Then if you look around, you can see the outer if. This outer if is in the same level with the Elif, and the else clause. So be very mindful of the indentation level. Now let's run the program again. And this time around, we're going to have enter a score. I'm going to enter 100. Then you can see we have A. And I'll run the program again. This time I'm going to provide 101. And as you can see, invalid score above 100. Now one more time, enter a score. I'll enter 1000. Invalid score above 100. So this is basically how we use the conditionals in Python. We looked at the if statement, we looked at the else, and we looked at the elif statement. Next, we're going to be learning about the loops.